Today's topic is the emergence of monasticism, how the monasteries developed and how the practice of Christian asceticism developed. The first root of Christian asceticism was the New Testament. Jesus was unmarried, and this factor might have had significance on the early church, which stressed following the example of Jesus' life. Later, we see Jerome said that Christ and Mary consecrated to the pattern of virginity. And overall, there is a significant emphasis on self denial in the New Testament, and this could easily be interpreted as fostering ascetic practices. Especially Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 7 5 to 7 that celibacy aids prayer and that it is better to be single was also formative in this regard. Second root was Judaism. While Judaism as a whole did not markedly stress asceticism, but certain groups, such as a group called Essenes, emphasis asceticism or practice of celibacy. So Judaism was also a root. Next one, the wider society, especially the Greek philosophy, was based on a spirit-flesh dualism, which differentiate the body from the flesh-spirit dualism. Especially the ascetic perspectives were widespread in Greek philosophy, especially of this dualism. Ascetic perspectives were widespread, and a common viewpoint was that suppression of the body led to the elevation of the spirit. So we need to suppress body through strict asceticism. And the dualism, the spirit is good and the flesh is evil. So suppress flesh is needed for attaining salvation was again another root of Christian asceticism. Early Christian asceticism, celibacy was honored, and Ignatius seems to know of consecrated virginity at the beginning of the 2nd century. He says that those who continue in celibacy out of spiritual devotion should do so without boasting. In the second half of the 2nd century, the pagan doctor Galen wrote of Christians, their contempt for death is patent to us every day, and likewise their restraint from intercourse, for they include not only men but also women who refrain from intercourse all their lives. The 2nd century Christian apologist Athenagoras wrote similarly. He said, "You would find among us both men and women, growing old unmarried, in the hope of living in closer communion with God, remaining in virginity and in the state of a eunuch brings one nearer to God." His writing, a plea for the Christians, 33, we can see this quotation. Justin Martyr in his Apology 15, 1 to 5 says, "Many, both men and women of the age of 60 or 70 years, who have been disciples of Christ from their youth, continue in immaculate, means spotless, purity, means they are unmarried and still keeping their virginity." The extreme of early Christian asceticism. Tertullian in his writings advocated rigorous asceticism. He equated marriage with fornication and allowed marriage only as a concession to weakness in his exhortation on chastity, chapter 10, 1. So, in that, he said he equated marriage with fornication. And he also says about fasting. Fasting was likewise vital for spiritual progress. In his writing On the Soul 48:4, Origen stressed the superiority of celibacy over marriage. Origen was the first writer to assert the everlasting virginity of Mary. In his writing against Celsus 8:55, Eusebius, another historian, even castrated himself to avoid temptation. The development of monastic movement. The end of persecution left asceticism the highest achievement on the road to self-renunciation. There was no other way to show their spirituality. So, asceticism was the only practice that they can show their spirituality because there was no persecution. And the monastic movement started in Egypt. A man called Antony of a wealthy family, after reading Matthew 19:21, gave up all his possessions by distributing to the poor. And after arranging for his sister's life, he took up asceticism. After a time, he went to the Egyptian desert and lived in complete solitude. And his example was followed by many people, and the Egyptian desert became dotted with hermit dwellings. Many Egyptian deserts became centers of hermits dwelling and later developed as monasteries. But it was Pachomius who first formed a monastic order. He was an Egyptian soldier who was converted to Christianity and took up a solitary life. He soon felt that the irregularities of the hermit life were not good and started the first monastery in AD 320. According to his regulation, the hermits should live together and everybody have assigned work. They had uniform clothing and they fixed a special hour for worship. Within a few years, there were 10 such monasteries in Egypt, and soon the movement spread throughout the Roman Empire, even reaching far off islands. Women also were caught up by the movement, and women monasteries sprung up everywhere. The system of Pachomius was fully developed by Basil of Caesarea, one of the Cappadocian fathers, who produced a rule for his monasteries based upon a program of works, prayer, and reading. The works include works of charity. The most famous of all was the great movement of monasticism developed by Benedict of Nursia 480 to 547. He came from a rich family but sold all he had and organized a monastic life in Monte Cassino in AD 529. And he produced a famous rule usually called the Rule of Benedict. According to the Rule of Benedict, everybody who wanted to join the monastic life must do 1 year of probation as a novice. After 1 year, the person who wanted to enter into a lifelong promise of chastity, that means celibacy, poverty, and obedience, could be formally admitted and became a monk. There should be one head in a monastery called the abbot. Worship occupied a prime position, that is 7 times a day. Work was compulsory and divided into 2 kinds: manual labor in the field and reading and copying. And there were many extremists as well as in the monastic orders. A person called Saint Simon Stylitz, after having lived buried up to his neck in the ground for several months, he decided to achieve holiness by becoming an ecclesiastical pole-sitter. He spent 30 years of his life on top of a pillar near Antioch. And he was regarded highly, and it is said that 60 bishops came to him for his approval. Another extremist was Bosky, who lived grazing grass like an animal. And another person was Ammon, who never undressed nor bathed after became a hermit.